Hello there, Mr. Hoorn here with another quick update. Before I go into that, let me first take a drink. So I'm mentally exhausted from what I've done the past half hour to an hour. So, my quick update pertains to me learning business. Um, so, before I go into what I'm currently going to do, let me first tell you uh, my struggle from the previous few days. As you may know, I'm an aspiring learning expert, and it is my ambition to globally optimize education. So I enjoy doing research into learning, education, and cognition, thinking, reading, etc. Um, I also want to learn business. It's no issue of a lack of demotivation or something. Sorry, a lack of motivation or anything. That's not the case. But um, what has been the case is that I was struggling to find an efficient method for actually reading the material and actually learning it, which is strange for my expertise. But that is because usually my methods are specifically made towards reading a single book or a single source at a time. But what I wanted to try actually was a syntopical reading, as Mortimer Jeremy Adler would call it. Book. How to Read a Book, which I've read as one of the first nonfiction books I've ever read. So I read it around December 2021. Uh, I dove a little bit more into it like today and a few days before that to see what he was dealing with for a syntopical reading. But either way, so I was experimenting with a few different methods at first to read multiple books at once. But it didn't feel right to me. So I was like a little bit not really depressed, but with lack of a better word, like I was kind of depressed like the previous 2 days because I was really struggling with thinking of a good plan how I would do this because I'm also on a time constraint. Today I finally settled on a method. I came while showering and sleeping. I came on a breakthrough, and I've compiled a method for myself, which really integrates syntopical reading as Mortimer Adler describes it in his book, How to Read a Book, together with what do you call it, like um, inquiry-based learning and learning in layers as well as order control. I've really created an integrated method, so I'm going to apply that actually and afterwards reflect on it using columns to see where inefficiencies lay and how to improve it. But either way, before I mention the books I will read, I something that just crossed my mind is that before this I was also trying a method out that I integrated between multiple different learning theories as for meta learning. And that also really tired me out, exhausted me because it didn't seem to work. And I spent several days to compile that based on very deep thinking. So it was really a setback for me that it didn't turn out to work the way I hoped. So I've been reflecting on that, and I guess that my primary issue was that I'm perfectionistic. So that's also a reason why I'm just executing right now instead of coming up with a perfect method first. In addition, what also seemed to be the issue was a paradox, because what I was trying to do with meta learning is actually the same paradox as Mortimer Jeremy Adler describes in syntopical reading. So by developing this method, I am also closer to developing a good meta learning method, but that's a story for another time. But essentially, the paradox is this: what I was trying to do is to have the learner, in this case me, create a map for how to learn before knowing the knowledge, which is, of course, quite hard, if not impossible, to do. So essentially, you want how do I correctly explain this? You want to create a map for how to learn a topic which you haven't learned. So how do you know what to learn when if you don't have the knowledge? So I did have some research guidelines from a jobs tasks analysis that I had created. So in theory, it would work. The problem is that there aren't many good sources that you can examine in a short amount of time to build an initial map. On top of that, my perfectionism. So I want like the perfect map right from the get-go, which I know is impossible. In addition, I had a bad mindset that I wanted to avoid learning completely until the map has been made, which also is not very beneficial. So right now I've settled upon just discarding the entire idea of meta learning in this case. I will come back to that later when I have more expertise with meta learning and learning theory related to that. I might as well dive into some manuals for instructional designers on job tasks analysis, because that seems to help a lot. I've primarily based that method on Merriam-Boer et al.'s book titled 10 Steps to Complex Learning, which is based on the framework of 4CID, which stands for 4-component instructional design. It is primarily based around or centered around learning very complicated skills such as programming. And the 4 components that they mention from the top of my head are authentic learning tasks, which co-align with the more well-known ultra learning from Scott H. Young. Authentic learning tasks essentially are learning tasks that, as much as possible, reflect the real-world scenario. The second component is supportive information, which many call the theory. Just-in-time or procedural information, which is how to do it, is the third component. Yeah, I already named 3. That's interesting. And then the fourth component would be part task practice, I think, which is if the most simple version of an authentic task or an authentic task is still too complicated to begin with, then you would essentially try to learn substitute skills in isolation, which you want to avoid as much as possible. But if it's not possible, then you should at least drill it to a certain degree so that you can start the authentic task without getting cognitive overload. And the reason you want to do that authentic tasks is because the sum usually in a complicated skill is bigger than its parts. So when you perform a complicated skill, you are not actually performing its substitute skills added. It's more like a relational formulation of those substitute skills. They are integrated. So when you perform them in isolation first and then eventually bring them together into complicated skills, more complicated, like the comprised version, what you miss out on is your mind's ability to coordinate them and to integrate them. So that's why you essentially want to start with like the authentic tasks. But yeah, I digressed. But that's also something that I'm very interested in. But the problem I had with that was that essentially the methodology assumes that you're either an expert in your industry and want to develop a curriculum for beginners, or you're an instructional designer with usually a lot of time available and the network to accomplish that. So you have people who are experts that you can interview. And I was trying to translate that into a methodology where you or me, as a complete beginner in a field, makes a curriculum for himself to become an expert. So you see the discrepancy. I thought I had a good method, and I still think it is quite effective. But I just underestimated the first part, which is to do the actual meta research to find out what is necessary and to find the sweet spot there. So I think I will make progress with that in the future, but for now I will let it go because I can't get further at my current level of expertise with that. But I'm sure I'll reach that eventually. But either way, that's a digression. So yeah, to sum up so far, I had troubles making a meta-learning method that seemed to work. And after that, I also had troubles with first deciding on a method to use to actually learn my business, which was kind of combined with my issues with the meta learning, because it was kind of an integrated whole, which is hard to explain. So yeah, but then today finally I've decided on a method to learn my business. And I've essentially made some progress starting with it. So, like I said, it's based on Mortimer Jeremy Adler's syntopical reading, along with what I know from cognitive load theory, inquiry-based learning, and learning based on layers and order control, which is something Justin Sang teaches in his ICA study course. So, without further ado, I will finally mention the books I will read, which might change. I initially started with a list of 16 books, but based on an inspection or read of each of them, I came down to 11 books. So, in order, well, not necessarily in order, but in order that I've listed them. 0 to 1 from Peter Thiel, The Lean Startup by Eric Rice, The E-Myth Revisited by Michael E. Gerber, Good to Great by James Collins, The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz, The Personal MBA by Josh Kaufman, 12 Months to 1 Million by Ryan Daniel Moran, Built to Last by James Collins, Rework by Jason Fried, The Startup Manual, and then specifically the strategy section or book by Steve Blank, and Your Next 5 Moves by Patrick David, if that's correct. So those are the 11 books that I will read in the coming 2 weeks. I will do my syntopical reading project / learning project in the coming 2 weeks. I want to learn as much about startups and like founding a startup and managing it within the coming 2 weeks as possible. I had a few other books which were related to like leadership and creativity directly, but I've decided that they're not as relevant to me right now, because right now I'm just trying to discover what is a startup. Well, not necessarily what is a startup, but what does it entail? What do I need to know in order to successfully run it, etc. So that's why I chose those 11 books. And after this syntopical project, I might start to go deeper into certain aspects through different books. So yeah, that. And based on the first inspection or read, actually a systematic skim, what I've identified so far is that it's interesting that some of the authors try to advocate for like the importance of actually planning out in a startup, like a business strategy, while other authors say that that's bullshit and it's better to innovate, continuously iterate. Instead of having a business plan, because they think that business planning is, well, it is doomed to fail if you don't know certain things yet. So I think personally that the correct answer lies somewhere in the middle of it, but I'm not sure yet because I haven't read through the books yet. But I'm curious to see what the arguments for either side are from multiple different authors. I'm sure to compare and contrast that, and based on that, make my own plan or not for my own business. So yeah, that's going to be a hell of a ride, which I find very interesting. And of course, it's not the only thing I'm going to do the coming 2 weeks, because I'm also diving into other things related to my business, such as creating a questionnaire for our first clients, and actually diving into more learning theory, specifically inquiry-based learning, also for my book. Yeah, that. And the next step I'm going to do, because I've now curated my list of bibliography to read, or my list of books, which is known as a bibliography. So the next step is essentially to read them again inspectionally, but this time I'm not going to systematically skim. I'm going to actually speed read the book, and to identify the relevant passages, and make a list of that. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Yes, so that's what I'm going to do. It's keyword collection essentially, but based on my own terminology. So I'm going through them one by one to identify the correct passages. Then the next step will come after that. So yeah, I might update you as I go on my process of syntopically reading / learning this, and my mind map progress, etc. Or, well, I will do that either way. At the end of the process, in about 2 weeks, I will definitely share my results. So yeah, that's my quick update, which eventually, or which right now has reached a point that it's not quick anymore. It's like 15 minutes. But yeah, see you in the next mouse. There it is. Right. Peace.